Hey friends, we are back with another book review. We are talking about Holy Sexuality and the Gospel by Christopher Yuan. Let's jump in. Now, this is one of my latest reads, actually. And again, the title is Holy Sexuality and the Gospel, subtitle Sex, Desire, and Relationships Shaped by God's Grand Story. And in it, this is really a sequel to Christopher Yuan's book about his own story that he co writes with his mother. If you don't know anything about Christopher Yuan, he has a very interesting testimony, and I definitely recommend you looking into his initial book. It talks about how he came to faith. He and his parents were not believers. He came out at some point in his life and said, I'm gay. I'm attracted to other guys. And he ended up living fully in that lifestyle, making a series of other bad decisions that eventually landed him in prison. And while he was in prison, his parents come to faith and they start trying to reach him and engage him in a way that they really weren't before when they'd pulled back. And through continued prayer and kindness and loving on him, he started coming closer to faith himself while he was in prison, starting to read the Bible just because he was bored and had nothing else to do. And he's intrigued by the person of Jesus and the story that the Bible tells. And he eventually comes to faith himself and has his life radically transformed. And it redeems his relationship with his parents and also transforms the rest of his life. So in this book, he's really addressing what is a theology of marriage, a theology of relationships, and ultimately, how do we address the conversation of same sex relationships and same sex attraction given a biblical worldview? Coming from that background and that experience, I think that Christopher Yuan tackles this discussion very carefully and very deeply. And I think he also gives some really helpful takeaways. In the book, Christopher Yuan tries to address questions that people have about same sex attraction and relationships and really help them try and reach their loved ones who have same sex attraction, maybe because of that are not following Jesus or have fallen away and aren't really pursuing that. He gives some really helpful advice on how to do that. But really, in trying to address that, he starts with the bigger picture, explaining the gospel and the grand story of the Bible and how we need to understand same sex relationships in light of that. Because when we do that, we realize that the problem with the world is not same sex attraction. The problem with the world is our sin, and we all struggle with it. We all are born with original sin. And that affects the way we operate. That affects the things that we look at. That affects the things that we love. We all have attractions and thoughts and desires that we ought not have. And as such, we are all on the same playing field. And that means that when we address people with same sex attraction, really we're addressing them the way that we would address anyone else. We all need forgiveness of our sin through Jesus, and we all need redemption and transformation into the way he intended life to be. And that's really what's going to be captured in this book. What is God's design for marriage, and why is that the case? But also, what is God's design for singleness, and what is the beauty in that? In this, he's trying to explain that really marriage is something that's temporary. In heaven, there is no marriage. So, in other words, singleness in a very real way, even whether it's temporary or you live your life in singleness, that's going to continue into eternity in heaven. And marriage, in also an equally beautiful way, foreshadows the kind of relationship we have with God. As such, there's a fulfilling life to be lived in either marriage or singleness. And he depicts that beautifully in the book by giving examples. But he also explains how, as the church, we're supposed to be a community, that even if you're single, that we should be roped into a community of doing life with other people. And he calls and commissions the church to welcome singles in to their life. He envisions a day when one day singles become such a regular part of married people's lives that maybe they'll give them a key and be like, okay, if you're ever alone or you don't know what to do or you're bored, come over, come home. And that's a beautiful thing to apply in the realization that there are so many people at church who are single and their home is going back to quite possibly just an empty apartment all by themselves in a dark, cold place. But we don't need to do life alone. Nobody needs to do life alone. In fact, we're not designed to do that. And as such, that is a very important way to invite people in and to gather them and to show them the love of Christ. On the whole, Christopher Yuan is explaining how we all struggle with sin nature and how that reflects itself in each of our lives, putting us all on the same playing field in need of Jesus and in need of his transformation. He also carefully explains his own story and the truth about people who have same sex attraction and tries to explain that in light of the gospel and what life looks like before conversion, to be converted, and even after being converted. What does that look like, and how can we love on and help and support and raise up our brothers and sisters in Christ? And ultimately, he points to sanctification, what that process looks like, and ultimately glorification as we join our Savior and Lord in heaven, and what that's going to look like, and how our lives, both in singleness and marriage, can reflect that and point to that, ultimately pointing us all towards our eternal destination, making what we do in this life both insignificant in the sense that it's so much shorter, and as such, we should put our gaze on what's next, but also significant in that what we do now matters, and we should direct it and point it all towards doing it the way God intended it to be done in a way that pleases Him. So I would highly recommend this book to anyone, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're in a relationship, whether you have opposite sex attractions, whether you have same sex attractions. This book wonderfully displays the gospel and how that it ought to be played out in our lives as we all struggle with our sin and ultimately need to come to Jesus, and as we can be fulfilled and changed and completed in such a way through only Jesus that no relationship, job, or anything else in this world could ever do. So rather than making our identity about being same sex attracted, rather than trying to direct people to try and be opposite sex attracted, he argues that we ought to pursue holy sexuality, not same sex sexuality, not even opposite sex sexuality. We ought to pursue holy sexuality, find Jesus, and be fulfilled and transformed by his work in our lives. So I'm going to judge this book on two things, as I do with all my books: the readability and the usability. As far as readability goes, I loved this book. I went through it in just over a week. This book is 20 chapters in length. Each chapter is about 9 pages long, which is exactly what I love to read, because then I can read multiple in one sitting and I just want to keep reading. Each chapter is kind of straight to the point in what he's trying to point out and explain. It's very purposeful, very intentional, and so it's easy to understand and really be convicted and transformed in our way of thinking, our way of seeing the gospel played out in real life, rather than having the way we understand the world then change the way we understand the gospel and how that ought to play itself out. So it's a very good, very clear, and very straight to the point book. That's just a joy to read, filled with lots of experiences and stories that convey the points that Christopher Yuan is making. So as far as readability goes, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. As far as usability goes, I'm going to give it also a 5 out of 5, because no matter where you are in your life, whatever experience it is that you come from, this book applies to everybody, whether you're single, in a relationship, married, regardless of whether you're attracted to the opposite sex or attracted to the same sex. This book is for all of us because we all need Jesus. We all ought to pursue holy sexuality, and that is ultimately reflected in the gospel. So when we clearly understand the gospel, we'll understand what sexuality is, what it ought to be, and how that can play itself out in our lives, no matter what experience we come from, no matter what we wrestle with, and no matter what desires are in our heart. Because when our hearts are set on Jesus and the things that he loves, he will give us a more fulfilling life than we ever imagined. And that happens in the community and fellowship of his church. And that ultimately is fulfilled and completed and forever satisfied in heaven. So this book is very usable in that it gives a vision of what the gospel is and how that plays itself out in regular life by addressing different people's experiences. But it also gives you practical tools on how to reach your loved ones who do have same-sex attractions, giving you practical tools of how Christopher Yuan was reached, how God worked in his life to draw him towards himself. But the same is true of any loved one who's not a believer. No matter who they're attracted to, no matter what experience they come from or decisions they've made, these same tools are to be used to reach them, because once again, everyone's on the same playing field. We all need Jesus. We all need his transformation, and we all need to set our hearts on who he is and nothing less. So there are practical tools on how to reach your loved ones, how to pray for your loved ones, and things you can do on a weekly basis to direct them towards God. So as far as usability goes, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. So that comes out to a 10 out of 10. I don't give that to a lot of books, but this book really has it all. It's an easy read. It's really transformative. It changed my own way of perceiving the world and other people and different experiences in light of the gospel. And that is so important because we can be so vulnerable to having other messages or ideas shape the way that we understand the gospel, shape the way that we understand other people, shape the way that we understand decisions made and the consequences of that actually aren't in line with the grand story of the Bible and the gospel message. So we need to have a fresh look at who Jesus is, what he did, what he commanded, and now what he expects his people to do, to behave, and to interact with sinners who we are in need of his saving. So look, this is an encouraging book. It's a message that there is no one too far gone. There's no lost sheep that Jesus isn't willing to go after. And there's no prodigal in a country too far for him to come back into the sonship of the one true God. So I definitely want to recommend that you guys go pick it up, give it a read, let it shape the way that you understand yourself in relation to Jesus, and let that transform the way that you interact with those who don't yet know the grace of Jesus, to invite them in, whether you're in your church setting or just in your individual life and relationships. So I'll leave a link in the description below so you can go pick it up, but I definitely want to recommend you guys go do that. If you like the video, then please like below, subscribe for more content just like this, and share the video with someone else that you think would benefit from reading Holy Sexuality and the Gospel. Sex, desire, and relationships shaped by God's grand story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.